back. You gotta remind me when you're doing
Sorry.
that shit, dude.
All right, are you ready?
Yeah, man. Whatever. Allegory. What?
Allegory.
Let's talk about it.
Welcome to Fireside Tats.
Welcome back.
The official
Premiere
podcast of the Tattoo Improvement Network. The premier tattoo podcast in the Mid-South area.
Yeah, thanks you guys for coming back.
Yeah, I don't know what episode this is, so I won't pretend that I do.
What?
But
be like
I do know what we're going to talk about.
57, 58?
No, it's more than that. Yeah, 59, maybe 59. We did a couple. You missed a couple down in Atlanta.
I didn't miss them.
No, you missed them.
Oh, yeah.
Couple of really solid painters.
Well, yeah, I couldn't go to the painting thing.
No, you couldn't go to the painting thing. You know what else I didn't mention? I think we've got a date with the Ink and Iron Festival in Nashville.
Yeah?
A lot of big tattooers. We're official media for that.
Official media.
That's right. That means we don't have to pay to get in.
That means you don't have a booth or anything, too, right?
Yeah,
It's nice.
yeah. No, they don't take any of our money.
Wander. It's good.
But that should be cool, and we'll keep.
Is that the old school convention or is that the horror one?
Do you know? No, it's not the horror one. It's the first. It's a Southern California convention, right?
Oh, it's on
and this
tour
is
or
their
something.
first. Their first. Yeah, their first one in Nashville, and big tattooers are there, and a lot of big music acts. Hayes Carl is playing. I love Hayes Carl. Yeah, huge music
I'm about
act.
to say, who?
No, whatever.
I'm sure he's big.
No, I mean, there's going to be people that you know too there. So, anyways, we'll keep everyone posted on exactly when that is. It'll be on the Fireside site, and hopefully we'll line up some good interviews with some folks.
Nashville, that's so close too. That'll be nice.
Yeah, no doubt. So, what do you want to talk about?
I thought we were going to talk about allegory, right? Isn't that what we're talking about? Like how to push your maybe design, how to push your influences, and maybe take back some of the control over some of the tattoos by basically outlining some ways that you can start a narrative. How you can maybe take a design that somebody wants. Often we have people that come in with a lot of ideas. I used to call them cornucopia tattoos, where it's like I want one of these, one of these, and one of these, and one of these, and shove them all into that same design. Maybe how you can get away with that if they're in the same theme. Yeah.
If you can abstract the idea a little bit.
Little abstraction, how to maybe turn some of the things they want into either symbolism, other objects, or make it so that the scene relates a little more with all these little objects in there. How to do that, maybe. I think it's a good way of taking. Allegory is often what I think of as like veiled language. You're trying to tell a story, either say,
but not literally.
Not literally.
You're probably like maybe a two levels of a story, like a superficial kind of meaning, and then another sometimes more complex.
You could say it's a hidden meaning, but
a hidden meaning, yeah.
Often it's just lightly veiled. I think most people probably consider this. If you think back of. Say back in the day, often when you looked at a painting, it was the average person was illiterate. They weren't trained, they didn't have a certain language. If they did, it was maybe just a Latin that they kind of recited back in the churches. So you would often have to look at paintings or art, and you would have to instantly identify with them with symbolism. Either who the person was, it had to be very evident, why they were in this scene, what was going on around them, but they often referred back to easily like Bible stories, other stories that you could easily relate to. So you could often just look at a painting, know who the person was, what the objects were in it, and get the entire story from that without having to read one word.
And that's where it was used really often, biblical or in religious
Usually
subject matter.
It's a philosophical, maybe historical, biblical, some type of, I say, betterment of yourself, one way or another, is usually what allegory is used for.
Yeah.
But often, we use it in tattooing. I think is when I say narrative, that's often what I'm meaning. It's trying to tell a story using the objects in it by using, say, maybe archetype objects, symbolism, or turning the actual story into an allegory so that it tells it outright, but using other references, maybe that the person hasn't thought of.
Would you, being someone that's studied that kind of thing for a long time, and I know that you've got like a steel trap of a mind, you remember that kind of stuff anyways. Yeah. I don't. That's why I wanted you to take the lead on this podcast. For someone like me, that maybe someone comes in with an idea, it's not something that's really doable. You're trying to you want to try to find a way to pull symbolism or allegory or something into, or at least be able to present that idea to a client. Is it just something that you've just developed by reading and studying over years and years? Or
I think so. That, and I often will buy books that are on, say, signs, symbols, and alliteration to other ideas. You will often find that that's your best way. It's knowing what other objects in art have often been referred to, why they're used. Almost every, say, flower or every tool or every instrument has a kind of an instant allegory to it. It relates to, say, an instrument relates to music, a brush relates to painting. Say, like I said, a cornucopia of gold coins coming out could be fortune, good wealth. Right. It could be easily anything that is relatable to someone's life. Usually, they want to be able to tell the story, though. Like I say, a lot of people that you meet that we find, that especially when they start to get bigger pieces, often like to have a hidden message to it, so that when the average person looks at it, they see one thing, but they have no idea what the actual concept really is for them. And often that's a lot of things that are very personal to the person. Do
you think a lot of times the person doesn't think that way? I feel like sometimes you need to explain, like they feel like people need to look at their tattoos and know what they mean.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I often, like I said, what you have is we have a lot of people that have come in, say, recently where we used to do a lot of text. When you first start off, we do a lot of text and you do words. And now there's a big modern movement to get like single words like breathe or think or relax or whatever.
Maybe buried in an infinity symbol.
And something like that. But that is the same point. Like, how do you get away from doing things that basically you have to have a lot of type for?
Yeah.
And that's mainly, it's like, I do not want to draw an illustration and then put this huge Bible quote or phrase underneath it that is basically saying what the illustration is. It's like, I can totally get away with just doing just the art form, just the alliteration, just the art to it without having to do all of the script to it. Now, I do not think that you need to read every tattoo for 20 minutes to figure out what the hell it is.
You're preaching to the choir. I agree.
Right. But some people, of course, they love that. They like to see the text. They like this instant translation for their idea. And it's usually, like I said, a Bible quote. Maybe it's their favorite poet or something like that. Like I said, that is when, if people are not into the ideas, if often they don't really know anything about type styles either, so they end up picking really just like the worst type styles, like crazy italic things that most people can't read anyway. So I try to talk them out of that. It's like, how can we do this? How can we design a tattoo without having to put every word that you want in there, especially if it's a lot of like names and dates, for Christ's sakes. Like every time we have to do a portrait now, people want like birth date, death date, their favorite name, their nickname on top of it, or some other crazy stuff. And often, like I said, with a portrait, it just takes away from it. You end up having to do all this other work to, like, the person should know when that person died. They should know when they were born too. It's the overall image that probably is the most important.
Right.
So I guess in the end, I think it's a good way to get away from that. Of course, some people.
It is. It is a good way, I think, to get away from it. But the reason that people come in that way is it's because it's what they've seen. It's what's been in front of them their entire lives. Praying hands with a banner with a verse that says whatever, God's son or something. Well, the praying hands in the rosary probably say that without the verse. Yeah. And a lot of times you're. Like we always talk about the, I want a Taurus sign with an actual bull, but then I want to say Taurus underneath it, and then I want to put my birthday under that.
Right. It's just like 4 times the alliteration.
How many times can you say the same thing?
Exactly. And in this case, especially, I think what you're talking about is like often what we have to do is maybe you've started that praying hands, and maybe you do have a quote, and now they want to turn that into a half sleeve. What do you do then? It's like often people just do, say, decorative background work where it's just cloud work, rays coming through a sun or something like that. But often what they don't think about is what we do a lot of is like putting maybe a dove in there. That always represents like the Holy Spirit. Some people, like I said, put a fig leaf in there that references back to that Noah's Ark, that new beginning, that new growth or whatever. I think there are easy ways to do some of that as allegory to say something that is already a religious tattoo without having to put a bunch of text and type into it.
And convincing people that they don't have to be so literal all the time. Right. whenever people, I think a lot of times when you have people that are not creative, they still want to come in and have some control, some say over something that's going to be on their body permanently. And I think if you just attack them and say that's stupid, that you're fighting a losing battle. But if you are willing to be a little bit creative, willing to think outside the box and be confident that, hey, you know what would really be nice? They'll listen to you 9 times out of 10.
9 times out of 10. I was about to say the exact same thing. If you show them what you're talking about, often instead of just saying, oh, that's not a good idea, this is it, showing them what you mean by showing them how to translate an idea like that, like I said, making an allegory or a narrative out of it, trying to transpose some of those ideas into actual objects that are readily identifiable, and then making that into a nice design. You couldn't get much better. And usually, like you said, most people, if they cannot think that way, the second they see something that is more well beyond what they were thinking, they usually get attached to it. And then they start to create their own ideas for it. You don't have to just tell them what this means. They will kind of divine their own attachment to it, how this translates back to them. And often, I don't know if you find that, but at the end of some of these tattoos, you'll find that they have a completely different story for the idea that you thought that it meant. Yeah. And I love that. I love hearing other people's ideas of what's actually on them, even though you may have all the creative input. They've turned it into something that really fits them, and it is them. Probably more to degree than any word that you can ever put on them. But I don't know if that's true.
And that's really common in painting and has been for years and years that painters will have, they may be painting some type of symbolism or allegory, but they don't describe it because they really would rather hear how people respond to it and what they think. And there's no reason that as tattooing and fine art as that line becomes more and more blurred, that we can't adopt that same mindset.
Absolutely. Translation is up to the people. You can't, and that's the whole idea too. You're making an image that can kind of transcend what these words really mean. And then hopefully you get something out of it, they get something out of it. They can tell a story that's well and beyond what you could do in written word. Yeah. But you do have to do a little more work, maybe a little research. Like I said, if you're not a painter, if you're not probably into art history, you'd have a hard time knowing what some of the symbolism really means.
And that's why
That's why you maybe want to go out and buy you a book or two.
Yeah. And I'm sure that if you Google, I would imagine if you Google symbolism, you'll end up with more than you could possibly digest. But I think that you're right, because I have flipped through a few of the books that we have at the shop. And now, see, we're not a shop that has Flash or books of Flash, but we have actual reference books. We have books of photographs of birds and of photographs of flowers and a lot of symbols,
but we
things
also,
like that.
We also have a lot of books that are basically translations of other languages that are much older, and those in basically reduce them down to like signs and symbols. Then you can easily kind of move, say, depending on what period you're working in. Often these are very specific to a time period or something like that. I think of like some of the oldest allegories that most people don't know about is maybe like Horus and Isis. And Horus is an absolute allegory. It's a man he's a bird man that's representing the sun, the power of the sun, and that kind of divinity. Like that is an easy allegory. You see a person, he represents the sun and that power on you. While like the moon, the death, that is like it's a life and death. So it's an easy allegory between just having two figures create basically a solar cycle, and then creating basically what is life and death. That's an easy, straightforward allegory that I think most people can get around. Like, how do you translate that back into what you want to do? Not just with them, but
you just using them as an example because that's a good one. That is such it's a theme that you find in tattooing a lot. That's rarely the way you see it expressed is with figures, and so I bet you could really just delve into a few niche areas, just into mythology, Greek mythology, or
I'm often paintings like you said. You see now with like say like a swan in it. You almost instantly think back to Zeus turning himself into swans, cuddling. I cannot remember the name of the woman, but that's an instant allegory. You see a swan, you realize who that's supposed to be and what maybe that story is. Or the golden rain coming in through the window. Like, again, those are allegories to a person but they kind of glisten back to what his persona is, and that's often what it is. You take on these like virtues of a person, and you can actually make those into an allegorical story. Like, how do you make, say, or like I've read ones where people think that, like, say, the Wizard of Oz is an allegory for the banking problems, the Golden Brick Road, the Emerald City, things like that. Where Frank Baum said it was never like that. He just wrote a fairy tale basically out of his own mind. A lot of people think Tolkien and then the whole, all of his books are these allegories for World War II. He is vehemently against allegories. He was just trying to tell, make an entire language, make an entire species, give what was probably more of a weird back history for England or something like that. Like, there are no like surviving old myths for some of these places, and I think these are kind of before that. Even I kind of gets back to like Conan and stuff. You're talking about Hyperborea, places that aren't on the earth anymore. These are absolute allegories for times and places that are lost to us, but they give you an inkling of what that period was like and what, like, say, the virtues of those people, how they lived. Those, of course, are, like, say, metaphysical or whatever, literary allegories. But how do you put those back into your own art? I think it's pretty easy. Like we said before, do a little research. Often, what you think of as like the smallest objects are actually they have a lot of meaning. Even a red rose to a white rose has a ton of different meaning between them. How you approach those?
Practical way to approach this.
Good Lord.
I'm a practical.
No,
guy.
I love it. I love
a practical way to approach this might be. I mean, because it could sound overwhelming to feel like you have to learn all of these things and be able to try to convince your client to do it. But many of us work by appointment these days. Well, we do consultations and we have several days or weeks or months to actually do the tattoo.
Usually.
It's taking bite-sized chunks of, and it's just, I think, maybe learning the questions to ask the client, like when they have specific imagery, like, well, what's it really about? What does that mean to you? Learning maybe the questions to ask to help you to get a starting point, a jumping off point of like, okay, how else can I describe what they just said to me?
I think I have a perfect example. Are you ready?
I am.
Not too long ago. It's been a little while. A woman came in and her and her husband had just gotten married. They had dated for a really long time. They wanted to basically create an astrological scene. She was a Gemini. He was a Leo. How to make a scene with something like that. Leo and a Gemini. Now, without symbols, without words and stuff like that. So I talked to them for a while. They got married on the beach. So they were thinking maybe some type of like beach scene. So like, now how do you make an astrological scene with a beach and stuff, like maybe a palm tree or whatever in there?
Right.
So of course, you reference back to, of course, Leo's a lion. Gemini are twins. In her case, she's the female. So I did basically two women walking on a beach on either side of a lion with palm trees on behind. Their date for their wedding, I actually did a numerology with just basically putting shells on the beach, certain kinds in certain places, so that each one, when you added them up, was a date. Then you have the basically twins, which is one on one side, basically petting the lion as it walks down the beach, which it's like almost like amorous towards. The other one kind of turning its back and almost afraid of it. So you have this like duality of like, it's a beautiful creature of nature, but absolutely you should not be touching this thing. So it's like one of those, how would you show two astrological symbols and then still put in maybe a place that they have in their head and a date?
That
Easy.
sounds like a
I
perfect
said,
solution.
Two twins, the same girl.
So what was your thought process to put that together?
That's what I said. How to put, like I said, she was the female, she was the Gemini. Try to transfer her back to a woman that is marrying this new man who probably she knows, but doesn't, you never know anyone, I guess. So again, here's this savage beast looking up at the one that's petting and grooming her, while the other is a little more hesitant. It's a perfect like, you may want to get married, but there's always is this the right thing? Should I be walking down this beach with this damn lion?
Right.
And then trying to make it somewhat beautiful. Nice landscape, nice trees, nice, like I said, everything where you would not know what that scene was. Two women walking down the beach with a lion.
So
Absolutely,
did they have any?
She loved it. She,
wasn't hesitant at all. So
not at all. As soon as she saw the drawing, she loved it more than what she could think of. An easy way to make a narrative out of a scene and still get everything that you need into it, and then still, like I said, able for me to do something that is like I said, very dimensional. Objects in front, people, lion, beautiful background.
I think that's
sunset.
I'm glad you thought of that. I think that's a perfect example, and it also illustrates our jobs as tattooers. It's a challenge sometimes. That sounds like that was probably a lot of thought and definitely a lot of drawing.
And definitely not their idea. That's one of those, they come in with ideas that you have to put together, you compound, you get an idea of how much space maybe she wants to take up, and then you just try to roll with it. You try to put in enough of an idea that, and then explaining it to them, and then I promise you they'll get more out of it. You can only put in how much you think of, and even then, it's like, I don't tell her. It's like, oh, I put one where it's petting it and one where it's afraid of it. She can see that. She doesn't have to. I don't have to tell her what that means to me. Hopefully, she hasn't, But she didn't say, no, I want them both petting, then, or no, I don't want,
Yeah.
Easily identifiable.
Right.
And the husband liked it, which was even better.
Yeah, yeah. And, you balance the scene by having one petting and the other.
And no words.
And no words.
Right.
If you get nothing out of this show, don't put words in your tattoos.
Right. You do not have to put it's one of those things. It's like some people think they need a title for every painting they do or every piece of artwork they have. And I just don't think so. I don't think that some things, of course, if you have an idea for what the title is and you paint to that title, absolutely, that's what that becomes. But if you're naming that thing after you've already done it, I think it's more like a slap in the face to it. It's not doing any good. If you didn't have the name to begin with, don't sit there and try to make up a name for this thing you just created. Right. It should have been there all along.
Or if it doesn't speak to you in a literal way. If there's nothing that you can really say, I mean, sometimes you might paint something in it and you develop an idea of what it's about. But
do you remember, Robert Williams? Remember Robert Williams, great painter. Yeah. He has 3 titles to all of his paintings, and each one is like by the time his third title is really like a paragraph, and it basically tells you everything that's in the painting, so that you have no misunderstandings. It's like it's his like psychological, assessment of his own painting. That way, there's no question. And that's because he was tired of it. He was like tired of other people making up these crazy things for his own paintings. So he's like, oh, all right, I'll do this. He literally has 3 titles to every one of those, 3, different descriptions. And each one is twice as long as the next one. So if you ever want to see some craziness, how well defined you can make your image if you really are on top of that, or how you can just make a painting and just love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I had someone I met down in Atlanta that had an entire show called Untitled that they just
perfect.
they just put up.
But that's what I mean. You often some artists, I think, the second you start putting some literary thing to your work, you're trying to make it more than it really is. Usually, you're putting some grandiose title to something. Does not make it any better of a work of art.
Yeah.
Think of the art first. If you don't already have a title, it should think of that first. That'll hopefully you kind of pick and choose what it really should be, if it has a title at all.
Yeah. And as far as this, back to the symbolism or allegory, it doesn't have to be necessarily something historical or something that it can be. It could just as easily be something that has a specific meaning to them, and that's why it's so important as far as the imagery goes. Like if you're willing to talk a little bit, you'll probably find that they identify certain images with the idea they're trying to, and it's something it would have never occurred to you, and it's something that has not occurred to them to incorporate as a design element instead of as a word. Right. And sometimes that just comes down to talking to people, taking your time. And we get caught up doing these fast little consultations because they're shoved in between tattoo appointments, and you don't have the time to do that. And it takes a little discipline for sure, but it takes discipline to put in the work that you put in for the piece you were just talking about. And what I think you have to think about in order to force yourself to take that time day in and day out is you're building a portfolio here. You're building a book. This will be your work will be left behind. And if you want to just be another street shop tattooer that literally drops down everything that the person wants into a tattoo, then that's what you'll be. But if you're willing to put this work in, if you're willing to do a little research, and especially with I agree buying books, but especially as easy as it is to Google something now.
It's true. I have to admit, I like books because it's almost like an encyclopedia. They will often reference back to other things, and so instead of having to go to this page and this page and this page and this page, you can just flip. You got the book right in front of you. Often those are also illustrated to a certain degree, which gives you a great idea of what they mean in some cases. But I think if you're just now starting on this road to allegory, often don't forget that you can often use signs and symbols in there as well. I often say that I don't like a lot of words in there, but often I hide symbols and numbers and other things like that all the time, and it's usually by person's request. I don't, how many times have you had this where somebody goes, I just want to hide this letter into this, like I just want to hide this guy's name into this stem of this rose or whatever.
Initials into this cloud.
Horrible idea. Of course, it's horrible. But if you've had to do it at all, you get an idea of how you can hide things in there, how you can make things basically symbolic, and how they should reference back in there. Often by playing with that, we often have to draw. I like dimensional objects, but sometimes putting a flat object in there as a symbol kind of roots it back to the skin a little bit. Where you can often play with the dimension of a piece by just playing with those. How the object's frame, how much dimension you can get out of it, and then how sometimes just one symbol here or there will kind of like lead your eye back around to the piece.
Yeah, it's planning it into the composition. Right. It's and not making it look like you haphazardly threw it in at the end. Mark Ryden is a brilliant genius doing that.
Exactly.
He works symbols into everything.
Have a lot of allegory in them. You may not know what those allegory ends. It's like, why does that girl love meat so much?
Right.
I don't know. Why does that worm have Abe Lincoln's head on it?
Yeah. But he literally does flat symbols and he'll lay them into the front of a train or into this. And if you're clever about the way that you place them,
and not just clever, often what you'll see him do is that he'll play with color contrast or color to push itself off of whatever. Say backing or things that are in close proximity. I mean, if you've never seen the power of a red object in the middle of a field of stuff, putting a red X or a red 1 into a field of stuff going on, your eye goes straight toward it. And of course, that's just an obvious thing. But how to move your eye towards these pieces too, and then how much you can get out of them, how much symbolism, how much say allegory can you put to it? I don't know. I think you have to have a lot of ideas. You can't just make the simplest thing into this one thing and be easily identifiable. Because, like I said, if you just put a red rose on somebody without some of the context around it or whatever, of course they're just going to think it's a rose. Same with any kind of, object like that.
When you're dealing with singular objects, I think so. But if you're building a composition, then I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if we've covered most of that, but I think
so. Where are we on time?
If you're
25 minutes in.
Oh man.
If you're, like I said, if you're pushing ideas though, try if you can. First, really talk to your client. Write those key words down, and then ask them, like, sometimes why they're getting it. What it really means to them, what they're trying to get out of this tattoo, and maybe then you'll see how much you can maybe push it. And then often, like I said, it's that matter of suggestion. If you don't make any suggestions, they won't accept any of your suggestions. Often, if you're just relying on what they tell you to frame that picture or to make that image, you might not get enough.
Well, how many times have you started asking questions and found out that they really just grabbed an image out of thin air because they felt like they had to have something to bring you? And even the main image that they're talking about isn't that important to them. It's the idea behind it. They just felt like they had to visualize something and bring it to you as a visual element.
Or they've seen it as a visual element in another way, and maybe that's not the best translation of it for them.
Yeah.
Often people, like you said, get things on them, they don't really know what they mean at all.
Yeah. So when you make the assumption that the person has a definite idea of what they're looking for, like they know the main element, you'll find if you just start asking questions that most of the time they're really open to your ideas, and they'll throw the main element of their design out in a second if you have something better.
Yeah, and especially that fits them. Often, like you said, some people are coming in, they're getting that first or second tattoo, and we've had to explain, it's like, look, I can do this easy image. But I can also fill the area, make it a much nicer tattoo for like the same price, but just doing the line work. Often they don't think about maybe blowing the image up or getting a little more space out of something when they think this is a one-shot deal. They think, oh, I'm going to add on to this later. And they don't tell you that. It's like, oh, I want this little tattoo right here, not thinking that they have so much space.
Usually you talk to them for 20 minutes and you find out, well, eventually I want it to be a sleeve.
Right.
Like, well, then let's design a sleeve.
Man. There's not much worse than that. And that's what I've had the other day. I had the same thing, like designing a half sleeve that by the time we talked about it and figured it out, he said, I want a 3/4 sleeve. And I was like, are you sure? 3/4 sleeve? Are you sure? So we lined that entire thing. By the next session, I want to turn it into a sleeve. Like, oh my fucking God.
Yeah.
But to do that, like again, you're just adding ribbons onto ribbons. There's not a lot of you can do. You have to, and like I said, I even knew he wanted a sleeve. I knew he wanted a sleeve, but he didn't tell me for like 2 months, and that's fine. But sometimes you have to pick that out. Sometimes
if you're been paying attention to Fireside Tats, you would have left yourself an N.
I did. I left myself. I always leave myself an N. You know I do, because I knew in the back. I knew in my heart. But in the same thing, in that sleeve, you have like all these. You have all these fish. It's an underwater sleeve, but then you have specific items in there that relate back to things that he wants, like a smashed diving helmet. There's a bottle that's basically caught in the coral that has a piece of paper in it that has the number 13 on it. I don't know what these items mean to him. I don't know what they have in the future or whatever for him. He wanted a specific animal, specific things. They could just be a nice scene, but you hope in the end that those are maybe specific people. Those are related not back to just what that animal is, but who's the person that asked him to get him in that sleeve. You know, who asked you to get that sea turtle in there? Because I know that he didn't think all of these objects up. Some of these were picked by his friends and family members and stuff, and so they represent for him specific people now, and that's a nice way of thinking about it too. Like you can absolutely have scenes where if you need some help, or if you're trying to translate maybe your own family tree, or you're trying to do something that's like I said, a little bigger than you can think. That's when you need maybe like more of an allegory. That's when you need to create more of a narrative that tells a little more into the piece without just like static images to do it.
Yeah, good examples. And I hope that helps. I think that was actually pretty.
Well, first of all, go out and, like I said, if you're not really comfortable doing, like, if you don't know what an allegory is, if you don't know how to really translate some of that stuff, go buy a book or two. You'd be surprised about how much you'll learn, I say, sure, you can look at it on Google, but again, you don't know what to look for. You're not searching and going, what does a red rose mean? What does a white rose mean? What does a blue rose mean? Those mean specific things to specific people and in different time periods. And you can absolutely, I'm about to do this piece on a woman pretty soon that's a vanitas piece. Everything in there is going to be some kind of alliteration to something else. But through objects. It's an allegory, but absolutely about death, life over death, I think that's why a lot of people just get skulls on them. They don't realize it's not, I just don't want a skull. No, that is you conquering death. I mean, that's what a lot of people believe, that this is me taking back that kind of negative energy in a weird way and making it positive. Now, if you can't understand that, well, that's fine. But that's why a lot of people get skulls on them. They just don't know it. It's an absolute allegory,
Yeah.
So what I'm thinking is a lot of things there are allegories for that you don't know. Get in touch with it. Know what these symbols mean. Know why you're getting objects on you. Everything has a kind of a story to it. Red robins, cardinals, every herb that's ever grown has probably got a story behind it. I'm just trying to even the weirdest of things like hemlock or. And maybe it may be through some type of religion you don't know about, like Norse mythology or Indian mythology, or there's a ton of things that are basically translated back, and if you get into them, you'll never get out of it. You'll just love it. You'll see the world around you is just full of symbols.
Yeah, especially if you're a visual person to begin with.
Yeah.
So there you go. Go buy a book on symbolism or on mythology, and flip through it at the bathroom.
In the bathroom. Yeah, keep one in there. I think we could relate a couple books. I could probably pick some titles out, but signs, symbols, mythology, you'll have no problem with. Try to really, like I said, I say push the imagery first so that you don't, even if you don't understand where it's going, and then you can always find out what it means, especially if these are specific objects for a person. They often are easily translatable. You may not know what they are, but go ahead and find out what they mean. And if they're like you said, you've getting a big jumble of imagery in there, try to figure out ones for them that make a little more sense.
Yeah. Take the time to ask questions of your clients.
Lots of questions. Write them down too. Don't think that you're going to remember this stuff. Don't. Just write it down on the piece of paper. That's what we do. We take a body map. I write down everything right beside that body map on that piece of paper.
Yep. Go to firesidetats.com.
Give us 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, sign up for our mailing list. Go to Facebook and hit the thumbs up. Go to Instagram. Look at Plug Ugly Art because we don't keep up with Fireside Tats at all.
And Making Mama Proud.
MakingMamaProud.com, portfolios.
For us.
And you can go to iTunes if you want and click 5 stars and leave us a comment. That'd be cool.
Yeah, go see Fury Road. This week has been the great. This last couple of weeks, I've seen Ex Machina, Fury Road, and the Avengers movie back to back.
All
so
good movies.
All great movies.
I just saw the Avengers. I haven't seen the other 2.
Yeah,
but the Avengers was really good.
You're gonna love them all. Trust me.
All right, you guys have a good night. Take her easy.
Thank you.